Neil Cross, thank you so much for being with us on Behind the Crimes. And you're 13 hours ahead in Wellington. It's a freezing day here in Bristol, where you're, I think, originally from, aren't you, in the west of England? What's it like out there in Wellington?
Well, gratifyingly, it's currently very beautiful. And one of the weirdest things that I found about moving so far away is that there's a constant need to justify this choice to your friends and family. So I hate it when people ask me what it's like and the weather's terrible, because I feel like I've failed in some way. So it's beautiful out there. It's blue skies, birds are singing.
I need to give you huge congratulations on the Iris Affair, which I've binged and loved. And it's a thriller. It's a chase across Italy. It's glamorous. Tell us a bit about where the idea came from, why you wanted to make it.
I wished I had an answer to that question which made me sound a bit more magisterial. But the truth is that I was really, really, really in the mood to watch a certain kind of TV show. And fundamentally, it's the kind of old-fashioned TV show that I used to watch in the 1970s. But there was a kind of strand of TV show that you get, kind of Lou Grade-ish shows. Prisoner, The Avengers, The Persuaders, The New Avengers, just shows that were slightly, and also kind of themselves influenced, I think, by Hitchcock's Technicolor period, where, you know, the skies are very blue and the clothes are very beautiful and the characters are just are more beautiful than we are and wittier than we are, and there's life is full of danger and twists and turns, and nobody drives a car with a roof on it, and you know, and if you're driving anywhere, it's either through a beautiful European city or along some gorgeous cliff top with the wind in your hair. I wanted to watch one of those shows. I wanted to watch the kind of show that might have Roger Moore in a safari suit in it. And I couldn't find one. I couldn't find one in the kind of the multiverse of television channels to which I have access, to which we all have access. I was flicking through, and I kind of realized the shows don't exist anymore. And I like telly, and I did what I've done since I was a kid, which is because I couldn't find the story that I wanted to watch, I decided to write it myself. And that's really where it comes from.
When you're creating this multi-million-pound project that you've got to persuade producers and directors and commissioners to dig deep into their pockets and spend a couple of years of their lives working on, talk us through how you were able to come up with the characters and the plot and to persuade.
I'm spectacularly messy and, to my colleagues, terrifyingly disorganized writer. And I can't do any of the things which you are told as a would-be writer you have to do in order to have this kind of career. So the answer itself to that question is incredibly messy, which Iris came to me out of whole cloth. I could see who Iris was. I know everything about Iris, apart from where she was born and what happened to her before the TV show began, because I've got no interest whatsoever in backstory, none whatsoever. Which I would, you know,
you give none. There's nothing. She's just a clever woman with an Irish accent who pops up, who's fantastic and very talented, isn't she? Yeah.
Nobody cares about backstory, unless backstory is absolutely fundamental to the story that you're telling in this moment. Nobody cares. My favorite illustration of this is Indiana Jones. When we meet Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, we don't care where he's from or where he went to school or who his dad was or how he got a scar under his lip or where his hat comes from. The film allows us to fall in love with the character because it's confident. I don't think it knows, you know, quite how iconic that character is going to be, but it knows it's Harrison Ford dressed like Humphrey Bogart, and he's in a South American jungle. You know, how much more do we need to know? And so we fall in love with Indiana Jones, and it's a lifelong love affair with me. And then, you know, and then we've got Temple of Doom, where we see him doing more stuff in another place and we fall in love with him a little bit more. And they kind of try to explain him to us in the only bad line in the whole 3 films, which is Fortune and Glory, kid, Fortune and Glory. I said, don't fuck off. Just don't make him say that. It doesn't, I can hear the studio note behind it. And we only really care to know where he came from. By the time we've had 2 films, I guess 10 years by then. And when we meet River Phoenix in film 3, it feels like a revelation. It's telling us something important about someone we know and love. And if we'd have been told all that stuff in film 1, the character, it's kind of, it's like someone being importunate on a speed date. Not that I've ever been on a speed date. I'm making up stories as I go along now. But, you know, it's kind of, I don't care what your favorite song is. Do you know, just, you know, you don't care what someone's favorite song is until you know the person. And when you love a person, their favorite song is one of the most important things in the world to know. So I'm like that about backstory.
But you've got big characters here. I mean, Cameron is hilarious, isn't he? He's so funny. It seemed like you had a lot of fun writing the dialogue for him.
This goes back to my kind of fundamental lack of organization. When I spoke with Tom Hollander, who went on to play the character, I didn't have anywhere near as close a grip on Cameron as I did on Idris. Graham Greene writes about this. Graham Greene wrote a great book about writing called Ways of Escape. And he talks about characters who are important, but for some kind of inexplicable reason refuse to come alive on the page. And you are aware as a writer that you are moving these characters around like you know, I don't want to use the chessboard analogy. I can't think of anything better. Like you're playing giraffes. And actually what you want is you want the game to start playing itself in some way. There's often a character that just never quite, you know, and I have to acknowledge that Cameron was that character for me in this show.
So Tom Hollander brought a new energy when you were writing it. Did you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it was the most, and you know, he was on the page, and so when we first meet the character Cameron in episodes 1 and 2, those scenes were written before. You know, Tom had read those scenes, and it was those scenes which led Tom to being interested in the role. And they were in the draft that he read, I guess, kind of witty but lifeless, because I didn't know what was 2 inches behind Cameron's eyes. Yeah, okay. He was an automaton. He was a robot on the page. He was in New York and we had a Zoom call and I was fucking terrified. I was terrified of meeting Tom Holland. I tried to cast him in everything I've ever done ever, and he's never displayed any interest whatsoever in anything I've ever done. And I assumed this would be the case. But our producer, Tim, had worked with Tom on Taboo. And we just had this kind of revelatory conversation in that I've never quite had a conversation with an actor where as human beings we're kind of weirdly simpatico, although we're very different. And so Cameron, the character on screen, arises wholly not from me or from Tom, but from the nature of the relationship I have with Tom.
And it's really interesting how you said that you struggled with him being an automaton, however you pronounce it, because I think the strongest scene, perhaps, certainly the most thoughtful scene, is the beginning of episode 8, where it's just a soliloquy and it's him talking just to camera, or looking just to the side of the camera. And that's an incredible piece of writing, beautiful, and he delivers it so beautifully too. It's different pace to everything else.
I suspect when I die, the 2 things that are going to come out of my obituary are a man coming out from under the bed in Luther, and that, you know, and that monologue, and that, you know, that entirely arises because when we started shooting, this goes back to me being, what's the word? Unprepared, chaotic, I had no idea where the show was going by the time we were shooting it, because a show is, and again, this goes against all the advice that any writer's ever given, which is know your ending, know this, know that, plan, outline, bollocks to all of that actually. A show is, and again, I'm looking for a fresh way to say it, and there is none. A show is a living thing. And you'll find that certain storylines aren't as exciting or as engaging as you'd hoped. Certain little scenes, which are kind of put in a show to be kind of dramatically functional, suddenly come alive and start singing, and they turn into the best scene in the show. So, and also it's not a case of giving an actor some words which the actor then says exactly as you dictate. It's a kind of, there's this lovely paso doble between what you write and what the actor performs, and what you then write for that actor based on the performance of what they've previously done. And it develops and changes and grows. And so I got to know Cameron as I got to know Tom. And weirdly, that monologue, so when it came to writing episode 8, we spent most of the year in Rome. I'd written the first scene where Iris meets Cameron. I had written because I've never been to Florence. So I set it in Florence because I want to go to Florence. I had to write episode 8. I was ill. They all fucked off to Florence. I was in the hotel by myself. And I was, and I didn't know anybody, and I couldn't really leave because I was so sick. And I fell into this behavior pattern, which was wake up, clean teeth, write. And I only eat one meal a day. And I'd order my meal at the end of the day, room service. And it would be the same meal and the same member of hotel staff at the same time, the same conversation. So I went into this very surreal, slightly kind of David Lynchian world of writing episode 8, which helped me to write it. But at the end of it, when I started to feel better, I thought, I'm going to venture out and I'm going to eat this meal on the roof. I'm going to be amongst human beings like a human being. And I stepped out of my room and I headed to the roof and I bumped into Tom Hollander. And so we got talking on the stairs. And he started asking me, the questions. How did Cameron get into this? Where did he go to school? And I had no idea. But at the same time, I realized while I was having this discussion that I hadn't cleaned my teeth or changed my clothes for about 5 days. I was in this entirely feral state. I felt fungal. And we were having a nice chat. And I said, well, his parents were Lib Dems. I don't know where that came from. But the short answer to this very rambling anecdote is that I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go back and I'll write it in Cameron's voice. I'll tell you where he comes from. So I went back to my room and I had a cocktail and I wrote that monologue in about 25 minutes.
Can I just take you back? So your childhood, you were born in Bristol, but you divided time between Bristol and Edinburgh?
It's quite weird looking back on this now from my advanced age and the fact that everybody's dead. But my mother was my name's not Cross. My birth name's not Cross. I was born Neil Gadd from Stockwood in South Bristol. And my mum was one of those people, I'm sure there's a word for it now, you probably get a drug for it now, who was in love with the person that she was when she was in love. And I don't think that's uncommon. But she left, the short version is she left my dad with a man called Derek Cross. And he was an interesting fellow. to say the least. And they went to live in Edinburgh, and it's kind of on a whim of Derek's. I think he was one of those men who was driven by whim. Everything was going to be better. Everything was going to be new. So I lived with. She left when I was 5, and she got custody of me when I was 7. So I went to live with them when I was 7. Then she and Derek kind of exploded on re-entry. Their marriage didn't last very long.
In what ways do you think that influenced what you later went on to do? Is there an influence there, do you think, or is that overthinking it?
No, I mean, I don't think it's Freudian. I think in some ways it's that kind of thing is much more kind of mechanical and Skinnerish in that in some ways it's like training a dog. But there is a kind of deep psychological effect on the adult caused by relationships you have as a child. And the truth is that until I met my wife, kind of Derek Cross was the most important person I ever met in my life, for good and ill.
Oh wow, okay.
As much he was a fucking tremendously fantastic. My I don't want to get all Dickensian about it, but my dad very quickly remarried, and he married a woman who had her own sons, and she'd come from a not great relationship, and it was one of those relationships, I suspect, where they'd each found a port in a storm, and it was, but I wasn't part of what that port required. So that part of my childhood was not great. Those between 5 and 7, my stepmother had kind of no interest in my kind of existence or indeed well-being or anything like that. And so when I was kind of whisked away to Edinburgh, which I'd never heard of, Derek Cross had this, he was one of those, I always describe him as being like a cross between Captain Mannering and Alain Delon. He was like this kind of strutting little bantam. He was a white South African. He was kind of handsome in a way, but certainly charismatic, could command a room. And like all people, particularly men of his bent, he knew how to seduce people. And I don't mean sexually. I mean, I suspect he had some kind of personality disorder, ultimately. But when you're 7 and you've been ignored for 2 years and your mum's been nowhere, and then suddenly someone shines the absolute bright focus of their love and attention on you, suddenly you're a hothouse flower. It was the most extraordinary thing. And it's not a small thing for a young child to be taken seriously. And I don't mean that your opinions matter, but the things that you like matter to somebody. The things that you're interested in matter to somebody. The things that you want to do matter to somebody. But the most important, possibly second most important effect he had on my life is that he introduced me to books. We were living in this kind of Victorian tenement, which I found out subsequently. The only reason they got it as this kind of council flat was it had been condemned as unfit for human habitation. Okay. and was scheduled to be demolished. So it was a very short-term let. It was vermin-ridden. It was a terrible place, but I loved it, because I love living with them. And he came home from work on a Friday night, and he had his carrier bag, and it was kind of full of corners. And he said, "This is for you." And he opened the bag, and it was just full of books. And it was Kidnapped, and I love Kidnapped still. It's still one of my favorite books. But Little Women, Little Men. People forget there was a Little Men. A whole bunch of children's classics. And he asked me to choose which one I was most interested in, which was Kidnapped. And he read to me every night until I went to sleep.
Okay, wow.
Until I was old enough to read myself to sleep.
So you would have been, 8, 9, 10 maybe when This
Oh, it's about, yeah, seven. This would have been.
7. Okay.
I was 7. Yeah.
Wow. I mean that's good good books as well, isn't it? It's a good influence to have very
Yeah, it
early
was
on.
really good books. Really good books. Yeah.
So after a little while, you returned back to Bristol, though, did you? Did you go back to with your mum or your dad who was down there, or and you were in South Bristol? Is that right?
Came to Bristol when I was 12, 13, about 2 and 13. I left when I was 20. I lived for a couple of years in Brighton, then went to Leeds. I did English and theology for my BA, then I did a master's in English.
And was that important to what you went on to do? Do you think, or in what ways was it important? Because you became a novelist soon afterwards, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I was a novelist before. I just not a published one. It was important in as much as, okay, so I was expelled from school. So I was out of school at 15.
What'd you do quickly?
Because I did nothing terrible. I mean, I was, I'm nothing if not consistent. And I was almost exactly the same at 15 as I am at 56. I have a really serious fucking problem being told what to do arbitrarily by people I don't respect. And then I was on the dole for, I think, nearly 7 years I was on the dole.
Oh, wow. So you go to university, you study English, and which is an achievement in itself to go from the dole to that. Just tell us about the writing then. How did the writing start? Where did the fire come from? I mean, because it's one thing to read books, it's another thing to have the discipline to actually write them and then to study them.
I've been writing since I was 6. It's not a vocation. There's no kind of sort of avocational aspect to it. It's a compulsion. My first novel, I can tell you, I started when I was 8, and I kid you not, I rewrote that fucking thing until I was 14. Yeah, I'd finish it. And between 8 and 8.5 or 8.5 and 9, you're a different person. So I'd finish the book and I'd be a different person at the end. So I'd start it again. So I was rewriting this thing until I was in my mid-teens. And it was called Another Kind of Warrior. There you go. I remember it. It's still part of my, it's still real to me.
It's a strong title. It's a very strong title.
I'm working class. And I come from a family that didn't engage with books. There weren't books around the house. It wasn't part of the kind of culture of my family. And so if I was to express a desire to be a writer to my family, we didn't know anybody who did anything like that. And it wasn't a job that real people did. So not only was it not taken seriously, it was kind of actively mocked. And kind of, and my friends knew that I wanted to do it, but it's kind of, how do you go from here to there? I'm going to use an awful word now. I can see the word coming down the pike at me, and I've got no choice but to use it. What university gave me was a sense of intellectual validation, which is to be immersed in a kind of middle-class milieu and not feel like an oik, and realize that, I can understand books as well as these people. And again, it's not that I had anything to say. I didn't want to express myself. I'm not fucking Billy Bragg. I just wanted to tell stories. What also helped me it was the Moorishness of amphetamines.
Right.
Yeah, because I do find amphetamines very Moorish, and there was, I think Yorkshire in those days ran basically on amphetamines.
So how did you get published, though? I mean, also you wouldn't have got published if you weren't good, I guess, and you went on to be longlisted for a Booker Prize as well. You definitely don't do that if you're not good.
When I was in Leeds, I wrote 2 novels. Right, one was called Christendom, which was pure science fiction, and I wrote it, and I've still got, I threw away the typescript about a year ago. I had it in the attic. And the second one was at that time called Adrenochrome. It was what became a book called Mr. In Between. And I suppose I was 23 when I wrote it. And I got to the penultimate chapter. And I realized that this is the best I can do. I've spent all of these years honing my craft. I didn't think of it in those terms. Practicing. I was practicing years and years and years. Learning lessons, getting better, learning what to do, learning what not to do. And I wrote this book and I thought, fuck me, I think this is all right. I think this is, or I couldn't imagine it in those days being able to write anything better. And it made me panic. And I just put it in a drawer for 5 years.
Really?
Yeah, because there was just this there was a sense of, this is the best I can do. If this gets rejected, it's never, ever going to happen for me.
Well, it got published in 98, didn't it?
Yes.
1998. Yeah. And you had a couple of books in between, didn't you? And then you got longlisted for the book with Always the Sun in 2004. How easy were you, by the time you got to that book, how easy were you finding it to write?
Well, it was, so part of this was lucky in that through happenstance, the nature of which wakes me up with terror still at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was one of you can cut this if you need to, but it's one of the most important moments of my life.
Yeah, go for it.
It's so fucking arbitrary that it terrifies me. I'd done my masters, or I was doing my masters. I was working in Waterstones in Leeds, but I had to suddenly consider my career. What am I going to do now? I went to the careers office at Leeds University. It's like one of the most grown-up things I've ever done. I went to the careers office to talk about how to become an adult education teacher. And there was a waiting room, like a doctor's waiting room. And all the seats were taken because everybody was going to get careers advice. So I was kind of stood by the wall. And then they called, number 12. And the woman who was number 12 stood up and went to her interview. And I sat in her seat. And under my ass, there was a leaflet. And I took the leaflet out. And it was a leaflet talking about graduate trainee positions at a publisher in London.
Right, okay.
And I had no idea such a thing existed. I'd never had any interest in careers or jobs or anything like that. And I thought, oh my God, book publishing, that sounds like an amazing job. And I applied for that graduate trainee position and got it. And everything which has happened to me since then
comes from that leaflet, sitting on that leaflet, because number 12 went to have a...
Yeah.
Wow.
If I'd have got to that room literally 5 minutes earlier or later, if whoever had left that leaflet in that chair had not left that leaflet in that chair, if that particular woman had not gone to her interview at that particular time, but someone else had, my entire life would never have happened. And that's what I mean by saying it's a non-reproducible career path, because it hinges on this one tiny sliding doors moment.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. You were longlisted for a book, for God's sake, and what prompted the change to screenplays?
I had no ambition to be a screenwriter. I didn't not have an ambition to be a screenwriter, but much like the idea of being a novelist when I was a teenager, it's just, it wasn't a job that anybody I knew did. Yeah, and by then I was living in New Zealand. I'd kind of gone full-time as a novelist, living in the consequent poverty. And it just had never occurred to me that it was a job opportunity or something I'd be good at or something I'd enjoy. And somebody said to me, and I couldn't now tell you who it was, that Always the Sun would make a good film. So I thought, oh, fuck it. Well, I'll write it. I'll write it as a screenplay. So I taught myself how to write screenplays by adapting this novel. And I found that I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the process. But also I did that thing of reading around it, the nature of the job. I was learning on the job as I wrote. And I realized that, direct novel to screen adaptations are very rare. And I knew that the ending of Always the Sun is a very confrontational last chapter. And I thought, well, God, that's never going to get to screen. And I recognized that, and challenged myself to come up with a different, more acceptable ending. And it's a really good ending. I was really proud. I was able to go back to the source material, change it, rearrange it, rewrite it. And being a published novelist, I had an agent. I showed my agent the script. He was able to get the script into the hands of a screenwriting agent who sent it to Kudos. Well, I sent it to a whole bunch of people. Kudos, who then made Spooks, really liked it, and they were interested in kind of doing a feature or a limited series or whatever. But kind of, they said, meanwhile, have you ever heard of a show called Spooks? And that's how it came to be.
Yeah. So you wrote Spooks. You also got a couple of Doctor Who's as well. I mean, what was it like to be able to write this British TV institution, to get your hands on a couple of episodes of that? I
loved writing Doctor Who. It was
You were a Matt Smith. You were a Matt Smith writer, weren't you? You did a couple of Matt.
I was a Matt Smith writer, and I would have. Well, I say happily done more. I also had. So my first experience with Doctor Who, as I wrote an episode called Hyde. And funny enough, the episode Hyde is where I met the director Jamie Payne, who went on to direct Luther season 5 and both Luther films. Jamie's a good collaborator and friend of mine. I loved writing Hyde because I wanted to write one of the kind of haunted house Doctor Who's that you'd have got in the 1970s. I loved absolutely everything about that. Everything about that experience. It was fucking joyous. It was the kind of Doctor Who that I'd really loved when I was young, and Matt Smith is an astonishingly adept actor, and you can give him these very complex speeches, and he'll just he does stuff with them, which is joyous. The other one, The Rings of Akartan, was a bit more of a challenge. Although it's the first one broadcast, it was the second one that I wrote. And the reason it was the second one that I wrote was because it was Stephen Moffat asked me to write it. And it was a bit of a challenge because the most difficult of any Doctor Who episode is the new companion's first full episode with the Doctor. Because she has to learn stuff about the Doctor that we already know. So how do you make that fresh? How do you make it new? And Stephen wanted something really optimistic. And I had kind of great production ideas, which is like, let's do like the Mos Eisley Cantina, but a whole fucking planet. And let's go back to the archives and let's find costumes you've never used or only used once. Let's go and get all the spaceship models that only made a brief appearance. Let's kind of use everything in the cupboard. Let's be like kind of Jamie Oliver with some dried pasta and some tin tomatoes. And really, really, really enjoyed it. And there was some difficulty writing the episode because we had to do a lot of what's called double banking. It was the last episode shot, and we lost the actor. We lost Matt for a week because he was having to do reshoots on previous episodes. So I had to write the Doctor out for a few pages, but that's part of the job. And anyway, really super proud of the episode. Really like it. Really great director, a guy called Farron Blackburn. I like Farron very much. He also directed some Luther. But Doctor Who is super, 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 super special to me. I grew up with it. I love it. It's in my DNA. It's in my marrow. And one of the most important people to me in the world is my sister. The youngest of my sisters, Caroline, who also loves Doctor Who. And she's just this kind of... Caroline is always my imaginary audience. She's the only person I ever think about watching stuff. And when this episode came out, this is in the early-ish days of Twitter, when a tweet could be extracted from the feed and used as a headline. And The Sun did a story on, I want to say page 3, but it was a full-page story, and the headline was "Worst Episode Ever." Yeah, it was, oh my God, I tell you. And until that point, I had been almost entirely immune to reviews, good or bad. There's an old saying which is, allow a bad review to spoil breakfast but not lunch. And I think that's really good advice, right? And I never really, it just constitutionally, it never really bothered me until that happened. And it threw me into this spiral of and only because I was thinking, Christ, my sister's going to read this. Stephen Moffat called me up before the episodes went out. And he said, and by this time, it's like being in the dirty dozen. You're these kind of scarred old veterans and you've been in the trenches and whatnot. And he said, any episode of Doctor Who takes a year to 18 months to find its place. And he said, so however they react, if they love it or they hate it, you've got to just, the great kind of ultimate validation, I suppose, is the episode is kind of, is that particular, I always thought Hyde was going to be the one that became the one, because I love that story. And it's got some very funny lines in it. But The Rings of a Carton is a cheat, I think largely again because of the monologue at the end, the monologue which Matt Smith is.
I need to ask you about Luther then. So you've written Spooks, you've done a couple of Doctor Who's, but also you've come up with your own series here. Where did Luther come from?
I only ever want to tell stories that I'd like to watch or read. That's my, that's my primary motivator. And I, with Spooks, I kind of felt like I told all the spy stories I had in my, and it was only supposed to be a temporary gig. It was, the idea of Spooks was, oh my God, I've got this job and I can get us out of debt. If I just do this for a year or two, I can get us, because we were in just hideous levels of debt for all kinds of reasons. But we were on the bones of our ass, me and Nadia, for like 7 or 8 years. And Spooks was my financial savior. And it was because we were on the bones of our ass because Nadia, when Nadia and I met at work at the publishers, right? We were best friends for a long time before we got together. And when we did get together, we got married very quickly. We had a child very quickly. And by this point, I was no longer a graduate trainee, and I had quite a good job. It was my first ever good job. And I'd published 2 books. And the first one was very successful. And the second one was catastrophically unsuccessful. And again, going back to think about reviews, I realized that, neither felt as triumphant or disastrous as one would imagine. It was okay. I'd gone through success and I was okay, and I'd gone through failure and I was okay. It was all right. And I was married and I had quite a good job and we were earning quite decent money, I mean, for both of us for the first time. But kids are a kind of money vacuum. They're like the opposite of a leaf blower for money. And Nad said to me, when are you going to write the next book? And I said to her, written 2, 1 was successful, 1 wasn't, and it was okay. And now, we've got a baby, we've got a mortgage, we've got a lot to pay. And she went, yeah. But when are you going to write the next book? And I went, well, look, we're working the hours. And Nad said to me, look, if you don't, she said, fine, don't write. If you haven't got time or the inclination or an idea, don't write. She said, but what worries me is that you're going to turn around when you're 50 and say, I used to be a writer, and it's going to break your heart. So I resigned the next day.
The next day?
The next day I went to
Wow.
work and resigned, yeah. And for, I guess, nearly 3 years, every Apple, every Orange, every bill, every television license came out of Nadia's wage. I didn't earn anything for a long time. And then we had another baby. And so we had slipped into really quite catastrophic debt. And it was driven by and ultimately justified by Nadia's faith in me and what I wanted to do and what I had to do. So when Spooks came along, it was like a financial savior. Was, oh, shit, thank God. It's a way to kind of, for me to drag us out of the financial hole that I'd put us in. And so really that was my primary motivator for that gig. And I just found that I really, really liked writing screenplays, and I thought I was quite good at it. And after I'd left Spooks, I was invited by the BBC to pitch. Now, I did not then, nor do I now, really know what a pitch is. I know a lot of proper grown-up writers who go off and do these things called pitches, and I know they prepare for them. And they might go in with images, they might go in with a script, they might go in with a structure. Now I say this, now I couldn't begin to do that. So I met Kate Harwood, who was then at the BBC, and Amanda Levin, who was then at the BBC. They took me for a coffee in a Starbucks. And they said, have you got any ideas? And being a jobbing writer, I said, well, what sort of thing are you looking for? And at the time, the British television landscape in the areas that I work in was in a kind of just post-CSI world where everything was about teams of forensic investigators or cold case team. It was all, they were, I can't remember what you call shows with a big cast, but they were cast-driven. They were all ensemble shows. And they said that what they were kind of thinking about was some kind of, maybe there's a gap, or maybe we could return to the days of the titular character. And I said, well, I've got this great character. And it was something I'd been planning to write a novel about. And I didn't really. I had, again, the character came first. The character that became Luther came first. And I described him to them in a exactly as I'm doing to you now. You can. I blethered on about this character that I wanted to write. And they said, well, what would the show be like? What does an episode look like? And in the moment, and literally in the moment, I said, well, one of my favorite shows of all time is Columbo. And Columbo's got this format that's never been reproduced, which is we will see the crime being committed at the very beginning. And the story becomes, cat and mouse. Yeah. It's a how catch 'em, not a whodunit. And I knew those phrases, and I was able to throw those phrases around with great authority. But I did literally pull it out of the air or out my ass. I pulled it out of some direction. Back in these days, there was no such thing in the UK as a showrunner in the sense that we now understand it. It was a producer-driven medium, but the producer was never the writer. And in fact, in a way which baffles me now, if you created and wrote every episode of a show, you were not allowed by some kind of weird constitutional law to be an executive producer.
Really? So you didn't exec?
I did ultimately, but not Luther. The first one. No. Right. So when we went to the Emmys for the first time for Luther, I wasn't listed when it was nominated for best whatever it was nominated for. I wasn't one of the names listed,
even though it's your invention.
Yeah, and I wrote every fucking episode. So if it were one best whatever it was nominated for, mini series or whatever, I would not technically have been allowed to go to the podium.
That's incredible. I remember it being a big hit, but And I thought quite quickly,
not as quickly as you. Sorry to burst that bubble, and I wish it. No, I don't wish it had been the case. I like what happened to it, and it speaks a lot about what the BBC was like back in those days. I think they marketed it very poorly. They marketed it with a lot of shots of Idris ducking under yellow police tape. And so, and like to me, you market it like Gone with the Wind. It would be kind of Ruth and Idris on all the posters, and you market that relationship, which is the key element of the show.
That's it. The hero and the villain stroke, the relationship between the two. It's
it's the Doctor and the Master. It's Hepburn, Tracy. It's all of those things. So episode 1 and 2 got really, really big audiences, really massive audiences, like audiences which would be, unthinkable today, I guess. But because I think it had been marketed in a way which misled the audience, people began to think, what the fuck is this show? What is going on? What is it about? What's the nature of it? And the audience, I mean, you always lose audiences mid-season anyway. But episode 6 also had the misfortune of going out against a Coronation Street 50th anniversary special or something. It was a live thing. And nobody watched it. Just nobody watched it. So we were looking very much at cancellation or not being picked up. But Ben Stevenson, who was kind of commissioner of BBC One, I can't remember what his job title was, loved the show. He really loved the show and fought for it. But it was, and this will date the process, I think the idea of the show and what Idris did kind of steeped in the British subconscious like a decent cup of tea. And you've got to leave the bag in the pot for a while. And it was only really when it was released on DVD, and it went straight to #1 in DVD, when just for some reason the DVD sales took off, and we proved that there was an audience for it. And but we had to go back in and see Jay Hunt, who's now at Apple in the UK. But she was again a massive supporter of the show. But she recommissioned the show on the understanding that she was taking a massive risk because the first season had not done as well as they'd hoped.
And it has gone on to be part of the great sort of the policing canon, hasn't it? It has, and and then the film, and now you've got a new film coming out, which you have written. It's all polished and it's looking beautiful, isn't it? That script for the new film.
It's looking gorgeous. Yeah, it is looking gorgeous.
So, what can you tell us about the new film?
Well, I'm allowed to. We had a very long kind of corporate conversation about this element of it, but Alice is back, which is a great thing for me. Yeah. It's one of the questions I'm asked randomly by almost everybody. When are we going to see Alice again? And I thought we were going to try maybe to keep a secret, although it seemed like a fool's errand to me. Even doing season 5 with Jamie Payne, the director of the film, we were papped with Ruth in the street with Idris. I think someone saw them from the bedroom window, took a picture with we weren't papped. It was a citizen journalist who sold a picture to the Mail. So I didn't think we could keep a secret, but the Netflix have embraced her return publicly.
Yeah, she wasn't in the first film, was she? The last.
She wasn't in the first film, no.
Yeah, and is it anything you can say about the plot? Where?
Probably not. I mean, I'm always slightly worried that that I'm going to say the wrong thing, and Netflix are going to send around a team of trained assassins and kill me in my bed.
They're well known.
What I can say is that it's proper Luther. Right. We haven't gone off piste. We haven't tried to. What we've tried to do, And this is, again, why I really like working with Jamie, is because he's got a long history with and sense of the show. And also, you know, Idris feels this too, is that we're not making, quotes, you know, a movie. We want to make a really, really, really fucking good Luther story. And that's what we keep coming back to, is that we've got to make the best Luther story we can possibly make. And I think it's going to be a cracker.
What influences have you had when it comes to writing crime?
Well, I read a lot of true crime, always have. And of course, I was very inspired by the books of John Douglas and the kind of what would you call them? The commercial end of the behavioral analysis unit at Quantico. That stuff's we all find that fascinating. And I think the idea of criminal profiling, although it's been to quite a large extent, I think, debunked, I think links to what I'd accused Agatha Christie of, which is the idea of restoration of order. Is that you can look at this inexplicable enormities that we visit upon each other and in some way explain them and systematize them and look at the eviscerated corpse of a human being and in some way work back in an analytical and scientific, applying an analytical and scientific method such that it will lead you inevitably to the killer. And there is something, I think, probably fallacious, but also fascinating and comforting about that. And I think what it tells us, much like conspiracy theories, is that human depravity and human evil is explicable. And if it's explicable, it's less to be feared. So I'm very interested in criminal profiling, not per se, but in our interest in it. And to the extent that I'm utterly 100% convinced that Aaron Kosminski was the Ripper, because he's the most prosaic suspect. And because they locked him away in Colney Hatch and he was out the fucking way. But one of the things which interested me about what Douglas wrote is that I'm going to call him the perpetrator. The killer, the murderer, the perpetrator is almost always named in the investigation from the early days. Either he's an obvious suspect, or he tried to inveigle, and I'm using the word he advisedly, or he tried to inveigle his way into the investigation, or he tries to befriend police, or any of these things. That when you finally get the person, I mean, we all know the truth about Peter Sutcliffe, that he was interviewed, God alone knows how many times, been interviewed many times, but they were drowning in information. They had so much information written on physical cards that they had to reinforce the floor of the police station. The information was literally so heavy. So one of the stories that kind of led me down the path towards Luther, and I think the first kind of crime story that I thought I could tell on telly was driven by this notion that he's there, he's in there. We know he's in there, but we don't know where. I kind of jotted out, I say I don't do outlines. This is something which I did sort of outline spiritually. I did something called the knowledge. And it was just the idea that we would begin a police investigation in scene one, certainly within the first 3 or 4 minutes, saying, here's a wall of suspects. There's 1,000 men on this wall. One of them is a serial killer. And we just don't know which one. And that seemed to be an interesting way of going about a mystery. saying, we know, it's the Agatha Christie approach. But the reason I called it the knowledge was because I'm still interested in how serial killers approach victims, how they select victims. And I love the idea of it being a taxi driver. And and of course, taxi drivers the knowledge, that's what teaches them, and that became episode, I think, 4 of season 1 of Luther. I put the taxi driver in it. The guy who played the taxi driver, I think, is the most terrifying Luther bad guy, in as much as he's the one that I drew most deliberately from life. He has, most Luther bad guys are werewolves and vampires. They're psychologically consistent, but they're not people we meet in the newsagent. The guy in this story was.
What is it about murder that is it the vicariousness of it? Is it it could have been me, or what drives them to do that? Or what do you think it is?
I've had various theories over the years, and I changed my mind on all of them. I used to think that it was an essentially small c conservative urge in us. The really crime fiction is not about the crime, it's about the restoration of order. And because of that, I sat slightly judgmentally on writers like Agatha Christie. It was Sarah Phelps who just kind of comprehensively reinvented for me, or opened my eyes to the truth of Agatha Christie. That it's not about this kind of middle-sized C, in fact, restoration of order. Because it's never the fucking butler who did it in Christie. It's not class-based at all in the way that I'd always kind of assumed it was. That what's interesting about those stories is how underwritten they are with moral rage. And the motivations are sex and money and status, always. So I think there's more of a case to be made for horror. And, and sometimes Luther crosses over into that territory. It's not vicarious so much as it's exercising evolutionary muscles in a safe environment. In the same way that people enjoy roller coasters. It's a rehearsal for terror. It's a rehearsal for the real thing. And I get some of that. I believe that to an extent about the more horrific end of crime fiction. But otherwise, I don't know. I put on YouTube, which is, one of the great miracles of the modern age. They will post, because of the American legal system allows this stuff to be accessed. They'll post sort of 2-3 hour long police interrogations, just taken from the CCTV cameras in the room. And I watch these things quite obsessively, but I also use them to get myself to sleep. And it's terrible because, the person who is being interrogated is having the worst day they're ever going to have, having given someone else, many people, the worst day they're ever going to have by taking a loved one. And somehow, for some reason, inexcusably and inexplicably, I find this stuff relaxing.
And you're not alone. And all of us get something from crime. What crimes? Yeah. What have there been any crimes that stick in your mind about that you have used or lent into or been inspired by?
Not really.
More a general thing.
What? No. What? So the first time I was interviewed ever was by a young woman who her name is stuck in my mind because of this event. She was called Ethna, and she, or Ethne, and she interviewed me for some kind of hipster magazine when Mr. In Between was published, and I met her in a pub adjacent to where I worked, and we're having a chat, much like you and I are having a chat now. And halfway through the conversation, she picked up a Nokia and sent a text, and the text was to her boyfriend, who had secretly accompanied her to this interview in case I was the psychopath who I appeared to be, having written this kind of terribly violent book. And I said to her, because I'm clearly just I'm not that thing, that I tend to write about not what I want to do to other people, or indeed not what other people have done. I tend to write about what I'm scared other people are going to do to me.
Right. Okay.
So my inspiration, if anything, is just my own terror.
Yeah. So a victimhood, not victimhood, but
Yeah,
being a victim
yeah.
as opposed to a perpetrator.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
And I think that side of my psychology and I guess many of us is that, you know, I guarantee you that if you're walking down a dark street by yourself in November in central London at 1 o'clock in the morning, you are writing an episode of Luther in your head. Every car that goes past, everybody who might be standing in the corner of an alley, every empty street, every kind of malfunctioning streetlight is telling you that story. And all I do is do what we all do, which is draw on that fear and give it shape and make a story out of it.
You've got such success, such incredible success, and with the Iris Affair recently, and Luther, and moving forward to more Luther and other projects. Can you quite believe that the boy that was given that bag of books with the corners sticking out with kidnapped inside has gone on to do what he's doing now? And what do you think that 7-year-old boy would have thought of the life you're leading?
I think he'd be really proud, is the truth. And I'm not. I do have a tremendous sense of continuity, so that I am aware every day that I am the same person. And I've been, you know, I'm less timid or less anxious than I was. But fundamentally, in every meaningful way, I'm the same person I've been since I was that kid. So I don't feel any disjunct from him. And I don't feel that the life that I currently lead is in any way the life that I was naturally designed for, or that represents some form of natural justice, or just it's how it should be. I'm aware that a combination of luck, of fate, of kind of, in some ways, my insane levels of bloody-mindedness, and sense of just
work.
What I don't, work, and what I don't want to do. Yeah.
I mean,
I know it every day.
Not many people would give up their job with a day's notice after a conversation with their wife and just go for it. Really, that is an incredible gamble, and that's clear.
And I write, and I still write every day. I feel, you know, if I don't write, and it still is a compulsion. And if I take time off, if I force myself to take time off, I just start writing really long emails. My emails get excessively long and detailed and confessional. So I'm the same person. I am, and I love the same things. And when I listen to, and I think this is why I've got no sense of nostalgia. I fucking hate nostalgia. It's pernicious, kind of cancerous, soul-destroying emotion. So when I listen to a song that I've loved since I was 15, it doesn't take me back to when I was 15. I love it now for exactly the same reasons that I loved it at 15. It's not about memories, it's about the song.
Yeah.
So for me, it's all about continuity.
Okay. Neil, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you. You've been so generous with your time and eloquent as well, and just wishing you all the success.
Thank you very much.
With Luther going forward, and all the success that you deserve with the Iris Affair. It's just great. Yes. I loved it.
Thank you. Well, it's always nice to speak to a Bristol and Leeds boy.